Chapter 1 Betrayed. The only home Miranda could remember was the cave on her island in the sun. But once her father told her, when you were little, you lived in a palace. When? She always asked, loving to hear these stories. Where was it? Why don't we live there now? It was in Milan, he told her, in the days when he was the Duke, Prospero, the wise old Duke of Milan. But I was not as wise as I should have been, he said. Then he told her of beautiful rooms hung with rich tapestries and filled with music, and of servants hurrying along winding corridors, and sometimes, when he was speaking about these things, his face would cloud with sadness. All of this was taken away from us, Miranda, he said. I ought to have seen it coming, but I didn't. And he told her how they came to lose their palace home. Prospero was in the library, sitting alone at his desk with the light of a single candle to see by, and studying a large leather-bound book. The night was so still that the only sound in the room was the crackle of pages as he turned them. He read on until the candle guttered and a thick pool of wax spilled across the desk in front of him. It was then, as he looked up and reached for a second candle, that he heard the tramp of feet outside. He frowned and listened. The library was the quietest part of the palace, at the end of a long corridor of grey stone. It surprised him to hear people walking there at this late hour, and these were urgent, hurried footsteps too. More like marching than walking, he thought. Footsteps and the clank of armour. He stood and peered towards the great oak door at the far end of the library. A moment later, the marching came to an abrupt halt. The room echoed to the jarring of the iron latch. The door swung open, and yellow light spilled across the floor. The doorway was filled with the dark shapes of men in helmets, some with swords drawn, some grasping spears. 3 or 4 held blazing torches above their heads. At the front of this group stood a tall figure in a cloak. "What is it?" asked Prospero mildly. "What's the matter here?" The tall man came towards him and bowed. He was silver-haired, and his pale face was half obscured by moving shadows. "My name is Gonzalo," he said. "I come from Alonso, the King of Naples. He bids me tell you that you are now his prisoner." Prospero stood for a moment, not sure that he had understood. "But the city gates are locked," he said at last. "There was no fighting. I would have heard." Gonzalo lowered his voice. "You are right. There was no fighting. The gates were opened for us." "But how? Who could have opened them?" "Your brother, Antonio." Prospero stared at him in disbelief. "My lord," continued Gonzalo, "you have paid too much attention to your books." He gestured to the shelves that surrounded them. "You have become the duke of this library and nothing more. You know that Naples and Milan are old enemies. For some time your brother has held talks with Naples. He and the King of Naples' brother—" "You mean Sebastian?" "Yes, my lord. They met in secret, and together they made a pact between Naples and Milan. It was Antonio who opened the gates to us. It is Antonio who is now the Duke of Milan in your place. These are painful orders for me to carry out, my lord, but I must ask you to come with me." So they led Prospero out of the library and down the long corridor to a winding staircase. He walked in silence, but his mind was racing. Betrayed by his own brother, handed over to his enemy. He was now marching to his death. He was sure of it. But this was not his greatest fear. "My daughter," he thought. "What's to become of Miranda?" They walked in silence through empty corridors and down countless twisting stairs until they came to a small room above the main gates. It was the nursery where Miranda played and slept. Prospero looked Gonzalo in the eye. "Do what you like to me," he said, "but let my daughter live." "I mean no harm to you or your daughter," Gonzalo told him. "You are to be banished from the city, not killed. And Miranda? Both of you. There is a ship waiting now." Gonzalo watched from the harbour wall as a soft breeze caught the sails and the ship pulled away slowly. Although he was Prospero's enemy, he was a fair-minded man with a kind heart. He did not like the orders he'd been given and had no wish to see the old Duke suffer. so he'd done all in his power to help him. He provided him with a chest of clothes, good food, and fresh water for the journey. He even arranged for the best of his books to be carried down from the library. When the last of these was carried aboard, he told the sailors to treat the prisoners with respect, and so they did, while Gonzalo was there to watch them. The ship was almost lost to sight when Prospero appeared at the stern rail with his daughter in his arms. Gonzalo saw him lift Miranda as if to show her the last of Milan, the last of their home. Then the dead of darkness closed around them, and he turned away. They sailed through the night, and when the dawn came up, there was no sign of any land. Prospero still had no idea where this journey would end. He asked the master of the ship, but he was met with sullen silence. Then, on the afternoon of the same day, he saw the men loading his books and supplies into one of the ship's boats. So he had his answer. They were to be cast adrift. And he was sure Antonio, his own brother, must have ordered it. Prospero and Miranda were helped into the little boat. It was an ancient craft, hardly more than a rotten shell of soft wood. It had no mast or oars. Is this why they let us live? Prospero thought bitterly, to dwindle to a slow death in an open boat? A fierce sun hung over them by day, and he rigged his cloak to shade Miranda from the heat. At night, under a cold moon, he huddled down and wrapped the cloak around both of them. They drifted on like this, day merging into night, and night into day, until one morning, while he was dozing with the child resting on his chest, he felt the boat grate against rock. He sat up and looked over the side. There were twists of coral just beneath the surface. Then he turned and saw a golden beach sloping up to trees and rock. Thin white clouds hung over the place like some sort of charm. Their frail boat had carried them to an island.